seen for a long time in the state of Washington, the left urge bail reform. They say our bail system is unfair to the poor who are having to stay behind bars as they await trial for extended periods of time. But there is currently a decision that might be made by the end of this month by the Washington State Supreme Court that could completely overhaul how bail works in the state of Washington. This segment is brought to you in partnership with our friends at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org. Make sure you sign up for their newsletter to be alerted to opportunities to get involved in saving this state we love. So we found this article going back all the way to 2016 from the ACLU of Washington. No money, no freedom. ACLU says Washington's bail system is fundamentally unfair and calls for reform. It says the ACLU has issued a position paper examining the many harms of jailing people in Washington before trial when they are unable to pay bail money and recommending principles for reform. So this has been going on for years and years and years, and the media in Washington state has also been covering this. I mean, KUOW article, people are sitting in jail because they're too poor to post bail. Cashless bail helps keep families together. Trump wants to shut it down. From the Seattle Times, an opinion piece that was published very recently, Washington needs to reform discriminatory bail system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what exactly is happening here? Now, this isn't something that the legislature is considering via a bill, our duly elected representatives, not that I always think they do a particularly bang-up job. This is a proposed rule change that's being sent to the Washington State Supreme Court for consideration. So it's the state's high court that is going to get to decide, which, of course, it's stacked with a lot of progressives right now, that gets to decide whether sweeping changes to how courts across the state of Washington, judges impose bail and deal with bail, if these changes will go into effect. So on Sundays with Subscribers this week, we were joined by Courtney Weimer. She is the Washington State Bail Agents Association president. She's worked as a bail agent for a really long time, and she described some of these changes to us.
So by my understanding, there's about 4 major parts of this proposal. The first part is that it takes out the language that allows judges to deny bail on capital offenses. The second part is that it changes the language from likelihood to fail to appear to willful flight, which then would force prosecutors to prove why that person missed court, which is almost impossible. And then it basically gives somebody like a free pass on their first missed court date. The third part of that is that it would cap most gross misdemeanor, and warrant amounts at $200. So it'd be $20 to get out of jail. And then the fourth part of that is that anybody with an ID can go into the court and just pay the 10% without any accountability for the other 90%. I mean, we had a situation in King County about 3 weeks ago now, promoting prostitution, sex trafficking, set at $200,000. The guy had gun charges in other counties. And a couple of girls walked in with an ID and $20,000 cash.
Wow. Insane. And what they're calling it essentially is a get out of jail free card. So and what would even be the point if you have a judge that sets bail at like $100,000? Okay, but now you have a system where they just have to pay 10% directly to the court. And they don't even have to show that they have collateral or something of value worth the other 90% to be able to seize if they fail to appear. So it's the same thing as just setting their bail at 10 grand cash. It's insane. It makes literally no sense. And, Courtney says, and I've said this before, I've had family members who've been in, what do they call it? Criminal justice involved? Is that it? Is that the nice phrase? Going back to my dad, he was criminal justice involved quite a bit in his life. And I understand some of the concerns where if you've got 2 people sitting in jail charged with the same crime, if one has money and maybe a house that they can use as collateral, they can get out much easier than someone who doesn't. But one of the issues here is if you're familiar with how the system works, there are only certain things that a judge can consider when imposing bail. Likelihood to reappear. Does this person have, a long history of warrants bench warrants where they haven't reappeared in other cases. That's a pretty good indicator that they're not likely to reappear. So then you want to set their bail a little bit higher, right? Danger to the community if they're released. That's why for violent crimes, bail is typically set higher, because you have somebody who's already shown that they're potentially a danger to the community, and so the bail can get up. And then ability to pay. If you have someone who's indigent, literally homeless, that's why you see them released on little to no bail, because bail is a constitutional right. You have a right to bail, reasonable bail. And so judges already have to take into consideration someone's financial ability to pay and the inherent fairness or unfairness of where you set your bail. Courtney says this really is solving for a problem that doesn't exist.
No, judges already take into consideration somebody's financial situation. It is written into Court Rule 3.2 that they're supposed to do that. So it's not like, hey, little Johnny that's never been in trouble before, but doesn't have any money is sitting in jail. No, it's the guy that, hey, I don't have any money, but I've got 37 warrants and 23 misdemeanors, and I'm sitting in jail and don't have money. And so that's, I think, the frustrating part is that if you don't have history and you don't have money, judges are going to take that into consideration and more than likely release you anyway.
Yeah.
And so to sit here and say, well, it's just the poor people sitting in jail, well, that's frustrating, because regardless of your financial situation, if you have a bunch of criminal history or warrant history, shouldn't you be sitting in jail anyway?
Yeah. And here's the other thing. Bail and judges setting bail in our state, especially over the last 10 years, they're already, the bails are already so low. And I talked to Courtney about this because I've known Courtney for years. Back when I was a wee little 21-year-old crime reporter when I first came to Seattle 15 years ago, one of the things I did almost on a daily basis is I went to first appearances. You'd go down and you'd literally go to the King County Jail and you'd sit there and you'd see who was arrested overnight. And they'd go before a judge and they'd have their bail set and you'd figure out if there was anything worth covering that hadn't already been put out. You know, social media wasn't as prevalent where you had all the police departments and stuff who were already saying, here's who was arrested. So you had to literally go sit there. And that's where I met Courtney and other bail agents. And I'd sit there with them and, we'd hear what people did and we'd hear what the judge set their bail at. And back then, I rarely remember being surprised. I rarely remember being that's not very much bail for what they did. Usually it was pretty commensurate with the crime that they were accused of. And I haven't been back for first appearances a long time, but I asked Courtney about this on Sundays with Subscribers when she was on with us. And she said, I'm surprised daily. She said, I'm surprised daily with the people who they cut loose without having to post any bail at all. She's constantly surprised about the very low bail amounts for people accused of horrible, violent crimes. So we already have de facto bail reform in the state of Washington. We already have judges, we cover them all the time on the show, who are notorious for low bail or no bail, even in instances where you've had individuals who have been arrested and in and out 10 times, 20 times, 30 times, 40 times. So it's again, I think, they've instituted bail reform without doing it in an official way. So I think it'll make the public safety crisis much worse. But I also think reasonable people can have a conversation about, if this is a constitutional right, is the balance unfair to people who are poor? And do we need to do something about that specifically? And this isn't always true. I mean, rich people commit heinous crimes. Dateline literally is built around it. Dateline's not covering a lot of stories where it's an impoverished person, killed someone to steal from them. But a lot of crime is committed by people who are poor because they're committed with a financial motivation, getting money to buy drugs or whatever it is. So, and if you're comfortable in life, you tend not to commit crimes as readily because you don't have a lot of issues in your life that you're dealing with where you think it has to drive you into a life of crime. If you'd like to watch that interview with Courtney from Sundays with Subscribers, you can do that by signing up to become a subscriber. Go to undividedpod.com, undividedpod.com. Click on the banner that says support the show. We do interesting in-depth interviews on topics every Sunday just for subscribers. And that segment is brought to you in partnership with our friends at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action and do something. If you're mad at the state of things in Washington, they send out newsletters with ample opportunities to get involved and make your voice heard. And I think they have some really cool functions that make it easier to just click, have your voice heard, and all that stuff. So future42.org.